Okay, so before this episode starts, I know we're going to be talking about Ukraine, but we have just received an update on Tommy Robinson that I thought I really needed to share before we get into the main bulk of what goes on. And also, this is a bit of a spoilers in the makeup. That doesn't matter. Anyway, basically, as we all know, Tommy Robinson has been in solitary confinement in Wood Hill. We did a whole episode on it. It did really well. If you haven't already watched that, go watch that episode where we recap the whole timeline. But basically, we have now got an update because he has been officially examined and consulted by a forensic psychiatrist who was deployed to the prison because obviously he's not doing well, right, after all the restrictions he's had. Basically, they assessed him for ADHD and PTSD, and yeah, he's really just not doing well at the moment. He said, like, via his legal team that he's waking up at 3 a.m. in, like, cold sweats, and he's really panicking about his kids. Obviously, we talked about that in the episode. Obviously, his kids and his family have always been his main priority, aside from, obviously, what he fights for, but in his personal life, he's always trying to protect his kids from the stuff that they could go through as a result of the kind of scrutiny that he gets. And yeah, just overall he is really not doing well in terms of his physical and mental health. His legal team have been fighting to get the UN involved, as we talked about, because, you know, this is a violation of human rights on several points and levels. And basically the conclusion of it is officially this has been deemed as mental torture. The conditions he's going through in prison have been officially deemed as mental torture, not only by the psychiatrist but also by his legal team and now the UN. So that's the update that we have at the moment. I'm going to try and keep you guys updated. Probably my next episode will probably be, if we get any more updates, talking about that, because this is obviously really important that we keep the conversation going about all this. So yeah, just wanted to add that update at the beginning if you guys weren't already aware. And now we're going to get on to what's been happening since my last podcast episode with Ukraine and Zelensky and Trump and all that jazz and the EU. So hope you enjoyed that episode. As I say, just wanted to add this in here. And now on to Ukraine. Listen, Linda, did I expect to be filming a podcast episode this soon after the last one? No. But seemingly, like, when I uploaded the last episode of the podcast, that just triggered everything happening. So I was expecting this episode to be a bit shorter than my normal episodes. If you're new here, welcome back to Playing in Politics. This is my politics and makeup podcast. Normally these videos are about half an hour long, 40 minutes to an hour, but we have a lot to cover today, and I'm gonna try and do this as quickly as I can. Because, yeah, again, this is more of just a recap episode, but yeah, we have a lot to cover because a lot has happened. So, and I'm sure that we've all been trying to keep up with it as best as we can. I know I have. But the main question I want to ask in this video is, should we be sending UK troops to Ukraine? Because that is the biggest issue that's come out of all of this stuff post argument in the White House, right? Again, if you're new to this channel, hi, my name is Anna. This is where I talk about politics and do my makeup at the same time. It's like Bailey Sarian, the true crime creator, but without the murder. However, we are talking about war yet again, so it kind of is about potentially people dying. But yeah, if you're curious about any of the makeup side of things, I always leave everything in the description. With that out the way, let's get into it. Right, so I've sort of tried to lay this out as best that I can in terms of the timeline, because as I say, it all kicked off. It all kicked off at the end of my last podcast episode. I was like, Zelensky's going to the UK, so surely we're gonna have some sort of press conference coming out of that, and the UK press are gonna ask all these questions. That was complete rubbish. I mean, it wasn't completely far-fetched, you know, as an idea, but I didn't realise that what he was actually coming over to do was go to number 10 and then number 11 to talk about some sort of defence deal with the UK. And that is probably the first point I do want to touch on in today's episode, because as we know, Labour and Kier Starmer's government this entire time has been pushing the narrative of, what is it, £22 million black hole, right, that the Tories left. I think the fact that they've now assigned 1.6 billion to Ukraine to fund missiles, isn't it? I think that has single-handedly proved the point that the black hole was never a thing, right? Like, I mean, we've already been talking about this. If you're on this kind of side of the political spectrum and just the internet when it comes to politics, I think we already know what we need to know about this, in that yeah, that, first of all, is not possible. Like, the Bank of England, when they first started coming out with all this, was literally saying it wasn't possible. And now, when it comes to this issue, and let's be honest, when it comes to Labour, like, war has been in their track record, hasn't it? I mean, look back to, like, Tony Blair. So the fact that this has now been like, oh, some miracle we're able to pluck 1.6 billion out of seemingly nowhere, well, out of, like, the defence foreign aid budget, and then just whack it to Ukraine. Like, I think that has single-handedly debunked the whole black hole thing. So let's start with that, because I don't think we were really expecting, when Zelensky came over to the UK, they were like, yeah, he's gonna go to number 10, but then he was like, why are they going to number 11? And then all this stuff happened, right? And it wasn't just that, it was also like, Kier Starmer was basically trying to interfere with what Trump's trying to do in terms of like the defense sort of peace agreement, and he's basically trying to be the EU's little lapdog, but also like one up in some way. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. It's like, okay, well, if you're arguing with the US, like, obviously Kier Starmer and Donald Trump are not on the same page in terms of politics, like their values and like where they sit on the spectrum, so of course, like, it would make sense for him to try and be like, okay, let me try and like one up DT, you know. At least that's just kind of how I viewed it. I don't know, like, did you kind of think about that in the same way? I'm curious about what you guys think about all this mess in the comments just throughout this episode, but yeah, that's kind of how I saw it. But again, the whole black hole thing completely debunked with how much money they were just able to pluck out of thin air and go, here you go, have some missiles. So that was the first point. And of course, this whole time there has been so much reaction over what happened, like, with the argument. I think the first people to come out with this sort of thing were Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, who are obviously of Reform UK. Obviously we know Nigel has been a long-term friend to Donald Trump, and so of course he was going to come forward and be like, yeah, that was completely unnecessary, and that argument basically has made Putin feel like he's won. I mean, if you watched the episode where we talked about everything, you know that, like, there is a theory going around that I do kind of support, in that maybe this whole argument and like the whole spectacle of it all is to give Putin a false sense of security and make it feel like they can drop their defenses a little bit, so then America can just get in there. However, I don't know, with everything that's happened over the past few days, I'm not entirely sure whether that theory still stands, whether it still has ground, in all fairness, because this whole thing just it escalated further, and we're gonna get into the whole timeline, as I say. Rupert Lowe had then come out and basically said, like, this is a conversation that shouldn't have happened in front of the cameras, which I agree with. That is a very good point. But he also said that it was incredibly damaging to the West, which again, I also agree with. By the way, today when I'm filming this is Ash Wednesday, so I'm doing my makeup, one for the podcast, but two because I'm going to church later, so just so we're aware. I made a short yesterday, obviously being Shrove Tuesday, like, today is Shrove Tuesday, not Pancake Day, we are a Christian country, let's remember that. Which of course is a wider issue that we can talk about in another episode, but yeah, just wanted to mention that. So yeah, as I say, I do agree with what both Farage and Lowe both said, because I thought that it was a very good point, especially what Rupert Lowe said about the fact that this shouldn't have happened, but that this should have happened behind closed doors and is damaging to the West. Again, if we're gonna go with the theory that this is all a plot, then it makes sense. I don't think, but that theory, as I say, is starting to fade a little bit. I'm not entirely sure. If things come out in the next few days that maybe support that theory, then okay, but considering where we are now in terms of coming for like a peace deal, again, I'm not entirely sure whether that theory was entirely true or not, but again, we shall see if there's any truth in it. So yeah, that was kind of the first reaction from the notable people in the UK. Obviously we've had reaction just kind of all over the place, left, right and centre, as we should, you know. It was a very dramatic weekend, and as I say, I wasn't expecting so much to happen straight after I uploaded the last podcast episode. So the next thing really that happened was obviously Kier Starmer then called a emergency EU leader summit, which again I think was a bit of a shock. It was like, whoa, slow down Starmer, slow down, it's not that deep, guy. Again, I think he's just trying to like one up, and because he's really unpopular at the moment, maybe he's trying to like bolster himself up in a way and make him seem like the big dog in a way, but of course, as we know, he is a big fan of the EU, so maybe he's just trying to like become best buddies with them again. Again, there's a whole theory about him wanting to rejoin the European Union, so maybe that's what this is about. We can speculate all we want, but yeah, so the first thing that happened again was that EU summit, which was when the first conversations about potential European boots on the ground and, more importantly, UK troops on the ground. Now, of course, this is what the big question is in today's episode, is whether that is a good idea. Now, personally, hell no. If you're gonna ask me what my opinion is, I do not think so. With the amount, I mean, I didn't know all this, but the figures that have come out in terms of how many armed forces we actually have, in terms of all the forces together, is about 70,000 or something like that, which is insanely low. I mean, especially if you were thinking like back even 10, maybe 15 years ago. I'm pretty sure it was more than that, and we have plenty of security issues in this country to be worrying about, never mind trying to sort out somebody else's mess. You leave all your thoughts in the comments, but that is my stance on it all, and it was a European-wide conversation. And the one thing I will say is that sentiment that I just shared about UK troops on the ground has been shared when it comes to Italian forces. Giorgia Meloni, who is the Italian Prime Minister, came out and was basically like, oh yeah, no, I support Ukraine peace. You can go, just not with my troops. My troops stay here, which I'm like, girl, yes. Big up the Italians. But yeah, no, that was great. And that is the kind of mentality we should be having in this country, and this conversation should not be happening. It should be trying to get the negotiations going again with the US, and obviously we know that they are now, because Zelensky has now said, after obviously these past few days of umming and ahhing, that he is gonna, like, he is now ready for peace, and he's obviously potentially going to go back to the White House, and that whole conversation is going to happen. So we have managed to get there. But yeah, as I say, this whole conversation about boots on the ground, again, I think Starmer's maybe being a little bit over dramatic. I mean, obviously this conflict is very serious, but it is a big thing, and we do obviously want peace. It's been going on for 3 years. Let's get it over with, please and thank you. But this is all a bit, yeah, no, absolutely not. Now, whilst all this was happening, Trump, being the X/Twitter god that he is, hit back. He's been tweeting some things, and when the EU summit happened, it was quite, I mean, we know Trump for his savage tweets, okay? And this was no exception, because he basically came out and said, well, I think we need to be focusing more on the drug lords and the migrants and the rape gangs and the people from mental institutions coming into our country, i.e. the US, so that we don't end up like Europe. And honestly, I was like, okay, that's savage, but entirely true, well done. You know, so obviously that was a direct hit at Europe, especially when everything was going on. So yeah, so he's basically come out and said, like, we need to stop worrying so much about Putin and worrying about the other issues that also affect the country. And I think that was because he was so fed up at that point with Zelensky, which again, kind of understandable with what happened at the White House at the weekend. But again, you know, it was an absolute savage comment to come out with. But I do kind of agree with that sentiment. Again, you know, as we all know, Europe, and especially the UK, is an absolute shit show at the moment. Like, it's really just not doing well in terms of the issues that he laid out there. You know, the rape gangs, the migrants, all these people being unchecked and coming into the UK and causing crimes. And we know we've had a massive issue with that as of recently. So the fact that he came out and said that whilst all this, like, whilst like the summit was going on, and you know, everyone's trying to be the heroes of Ukraine, I just thought was absolutely brilliant. And then Zelensky decided to come out and basically say that the Russian war was far from over, which triggered Donald Trump so much. And I think, I mean, he's continued to trigger him kind of since the argument, which it depends how you want to see it. I mean, again, this is a very serious issue, and I think that Trump is right to be passionate about peace. And I know that Zelensky is, they just haven't really been seeing eye to eye recently. But I think that Trump has the right idea, and as JD Vance has been coming out and saying, like, the only man in town with a proper plan for peace is President Trump, which I agree with, and we were gonna get to some of his comments a bit later. But yeah, when JD Vance came out and was like, oh yeah, so this war is far from over, Donald Trump was like, this is the worst thing you could have said. Again, this was all kind of on X, but this is the worst thing you could have said, and it was a bit stupid. I remember when I first read that, I was like, what do you mean? You literally had the opportunity to be working out peace, and now you're coming out and saying, oh yeah, like, it's far from over, we're years in the, you know, we've still got years there. And it's like, what are you on about? You've got a perfectly good mineral deal to be negotiated here, and you're waffling on about carrying on with death. Like, seriously. What is happening? What is going on? That is when Trump decided to be the businessman that he is and go, okay, if this is going to be your attitude, then no more aid for you. Frozen aid. And I know that everybody lost their minds when this happened. And, you know, for good reason. I do appreciate that, and I do appreciate why people were like, what? What is he doing? Is he just trying to punish Zelensky? And there's this whole thing about, just because you might disagree with Zelensky's approaches, all of a sudden you're anti-peace in Ukraine, or you don't care about the Ukrainian people who are dying and having their homes destroyed by Russia, which is completely separate things, right? And we really need to get this established. Just because somebody doesn't necessarily agree with the argument or the things that Zelensky said or his approaches and things doesn't necessarily mean that they want people to keep dying. In fact, completely the opposite. They want to protect the citizens of Ukraine, and they want Zelensky to be on the same page so we can all stop the fighting as quickly as humanly possible. That's the mindset, right? And yeah, so the whole freezing aid thing, as I say, everybody lost their minds because they thought, oh my god, what the heck's happening? What are they gonna do? And I think that also made Kier Starmer and Europe feel better, because they were like, well, we're still gonna help you out, here's a load of money. So it helped their cause, but again, America throughout this is their best chance. And, you know, I do actually agree with that yeah, with America's resources and with the influence and power that Trump has and they have, they are the best force to be helping out with this. So yeah, that whole thing, I think, is what single-handedly got, well, not necessarily single-handedly, maybe we'll get to this in a minute, but was definitely a big influence in what got Zelensky to come back to the negotiation table and actually be okay with making amends in that way. So, as I say, we are making progress in that, but yeah, everybody lost their minds, kind of for good reason, because it was a bit of a shock move. But when you think about it, when you're trying to do a deal and someone's not on the same page, of course you're gonna, like, start playing with it a bit and start to kind of not really punish them. It's like almost sanctions in a way, like what we did with Russia when they started the war. But again, it's all to kind of get the deal back on the table and basically say, hey, we are your best chance, which they are, you know, we've said that already, and basically show them that and be like, listen, we are your only way out of this, so come back with a level head, please and thank you. And that's exactly what he did, you know. As throughout all this, that's what makes Trump such an effective politician, is because he's not a politician, he's a businessman. And, you know, we can say that till the cows come home and it's gonna remain true, right? And that narrative has remained the same with JD Vance as well, who was doing an interview, I can't remember, with some news platform in the US, and yeah, he was basically saying that the argument was regrettable and that it shouldn't have happened, and that, yeah, the US is the best way forward. But the problem with what JD Vance said, he was a little bit too savage. He hit a little bit too close to home in some ways. These comments that he made, it depends how you want to view them. Now, because this can be quite controversial, and for good reason, you know, it depends what he meant by them, and we don't really know yet. But basically he came out and was basically saying, because obviously Trump doesn't want the funding to keep going, like, he wants the mineral deal, he wants to rebuild Ukraine, but he doesn't want to keep, like, sending them loads of money for missiles and things like the UK is trying to do and the EU's trying to do. So he basically said that, yeah, that is going to be the best deal, and what they don't need is a random country who haven't fought a war in 20 or 30 years to be helping them out, which is what rattled some feathers. And listen, again, we don't know exactly what country he was trying to get at with those comments. Some people say it's France and some people say it's the UK. I'll be honest, my first instinct when he said it, I was like, are you bashing the UK? Are you forgetting Iraq and Afghanistan where we helped you out? Like, we helped the US out with those conflicts, which, not gonna lie, especially when it comes to like Afghanistan, what was the point of that? Because Biden then removed all the troops and the Taliban just took over again, which is something that's been talked about recently for good reason, because there were so many people who died, lost limbs, all that stuff, for what? But again, that just kind of goes back to what they're saying about the US is the best, the US is the GOAT, come back to the US is going to be the only person who helps you, ignore Europe, ignore the UK, ignore everyone, we are the only ones with the real deal. And again, he did actually say, as I said before, his direct quote was like, the only man in town with the intention of peace is President Trump. So yeah, that's kind of what he said. But yeah, the comments about like, you know, we don't need help from like a random country that's not fought a war in 20-30 years, again, it depends what he meant. He didn't specifically name a country. Some people say it's France, some people say it's the UK, I don't know. What do you think he meant by those comments? You know, let me know in the comments. What country do you think he was on about there? Because yeah, it was a bit savage, especially if you meant the UK. It was just like straight up wrong, you know, so we shall see if anything comes out about that. But obviously the conversation in the UK at the moment is still, should we be sending our troops there? And I've been watching a lot of Dan from British Stand talk about this, and obviously he is ex-military, and he was making some really good points about the type of warfare that we're dealing with in Ukraine. It's not like what we were dealing with in Afghanistan, although as he quite rightly said, and as I've mentioned, you know, a lot of people were seriously maimed from those conflicts. They lost limbs, they lost legs, they lost arms, you know, all that stuff from bombs and mines and things like that, and I'm sure we all remember that from the news at the time. I know I do. But like in Ukraine, it's up a notch because it's drone warfare. It's not necessarily the same kind of stuff we're used to seeing. It is drones, and they are incredibly, like, a lot more savage and lethal than what we're used to seeing, because it is a case of just like, you are taken out very, very easily by a drone. And the last thing we want, especially with what I said before about the fact we have enough issues in the UK with security. I mean, as Trump said in that tweet earlier this week, you know, Europe as a whole, especially the UK, we are riddled with security issues in the form of illegal migrants and just the amount of criminals that are coming in on a daily and a weekly basis, let alone like a monthly and a yearly basis over the past few years. You know, we have massive issues when it comes to that, and the last thing we need to be doing, and the last thing we want to be doing, is sending our armed forces, who should be protecting our own borders, to go fight in this savage, very dangerous war, which is just going to escalate things, like, let's be real. So do I agree that Trump has a good deal on the table? Yes, I do actually think that I do actually agree with the narrative that I think America is their best foot forward, and they need to just shut the fuck up and get back to the table, which they are, you know, so that's not necessarily the issue, because now Zelensky has come forward and said he is now ready for peace, which is obviously good. So we will see what happens. But yeah, my personal thoughts, and I want to know all your thoughts in the comments, but my personal thoughts are Trump and the US have the best deal for peace and the best scenario for peace that Ukraine could ask for, and Kier Starmer needs to stop pretending like he's the big boss, and the EU just need to step it down a peg, because they don't need to be this involved. Yes, okay, they can send, you know, whatever support they want to and still support peace, but they don't need to be sending any troops over there. Please and thank you, we've got enough problems. And 3, Zelensky, I have my thoughts on you, on you, bud, but get back to the White House, please. Just do it. So those are my thoughts. I am gonna finish my makeup off camera, then I'm gonna come back with my concluding thoughts, even though I've only just done my concluding thoughts, but I'm gonna do like my outro and everything, and if I've come up with anything whilst I do the rest of my makeup, then we'll talk about that. But yeah, I'll come back with a full face and we shall conclude this episode. Okay, so this is what the makeup ended up looking like. Again, like the last episode, I'm filming this when the sun is right there, so I'm sorry, but you sort of see the shimmer a bit more if I do this, don't you? Oh no, I don't know. I'm trying to do more kind of like diving a bit more into like my alternative side, and I wasn't entirely sure whether to go full on today, but the black eyeliner underneath my eyes really brings out my eye colour. So, and also if you're a makeup girly, couple of things. One, I don't really recommend the little little purple sponges from Beauty Bay. I don't know what it is about them, they kind of blend things out a bit patchy, so in case you wanted to know. And also, I've been trying the new, well, not new, it's been out for ages, but this is new to me, the Maybelline Super Save Matte Ink liquid lipstick. I know I tend to use the Jeffree Star ones because they're really, really good, but this is meant to be even better. And so far, even though I've only got one shade and I've only worn this like twice now, absolutely obsessed, in love with this colour, in love with the way it dries, and this lip combo with like my corset, absolutely yes. Like, I was so close to like not loving this, and then I put the lip on and was like, the bitch is back. Anyway, just in case you were curious of what was going on inside my head. But as I say, I do want to know what you guys all think about this topic and all the chaos and everything in the comments, because this has been a chaotic weekend in the beginning of the week, hasn't it? So I want to know what you guys think. As I say, my opinion is no UK boots on the ground. We have enough to deal with, and you know, we spend too much on foreign aid as it is, and this whole thing is just, again, exposing how the black hole just wasn't a thing ever, and how ridiculous it is that we think that we can fund all this stuff. Anyway, Kier Starmer needs to take it down a peg. You know, he's getting a bit too big for his boots, isn't he? And yeah, let's hope that Zelensky goes back to the White House and is actually able to negotiate this mineral deal, because as I said a few times in this episode, that is the only way that we're going to achieve peace, is through Trump. And regardless of all the stuff that's happened, and you know, I don't fully agree with the argument being altogether Zelensky's fault. I do think that Trump and Vance started it a little bit. At the end of the day, when it comes to peace and it comes to this deal, the US is their best way forward, and that's who we need to be backing. We need to be backing peace and backing the US. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, as I've said too many times, let me know what you think in the comments. Hopefully the next episode will be a bit like the normal kind of format, although I don't know, because I'm getting close to being able to do live streams. So make sure to hit subscribe to get me to that milestone of 500 subscribers. That's what we're trying to get to at the moment, and then 1,000 on from that. Thank you to everybody who watches my videos, who comments on the podcast episodes, who comments on the shorts. You know, it means the world. I love what I do over here, and yeah, let's hope for peace for Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine and the US, and I will see you guys in my next video. I will try and update you on either my shorts or make another kind of shorter recap episode of the podcast to update you as to what happened. But yeah, make sure to stay tuned, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in my next one.